What's up, Green Bay Packers fans? Welcome back. As always, thank you for joining me. My name is Paul Brettel. Today we're going to continue on in my Packers prediction series for their upcoming free agency class, taking a look at why they'll resign each of their free agents, why they let them go elsewhere, and then making that prediction. Today, we're talking about linebacker Eric Wilson. But first, hit like on the video, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. I do greatly appreciate it. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. Find all my work over at ESPNlacrosse.com, including the article versions of what we're discussing in these videos. And my Wisconsin sports radio fans, Packers, Brewers, Bucks, Badgers, every single day of the week, download the 105.5 ESPN Lacrosse app. So like I said, we go through each of these Packers free agents. We're focusing on Eric Wilson today, taking a closer look at, from the Packers' perspective, why would they want this player back? Why would they want to re-sign this free agent? And then the other side, why would they let the player walk? Why would they go in a different direction? And then we make our prediction. So when it comes to Eric Wilson, the 2024 season was his third with the Packers, continually signing a series of one-year deals. So does he do that again with Green Bay here in 2025? Between 22 and 2023 seasons, his first and second years with Green Bay, he saw a slight playing time increase on the defensive side of the ball, but his primary role was on special teams. However, this season, Eric Wilson took on a much, much larger responsibility on the defensive side of the ball, playing 559 snaps this past season. And not just in 2024, but his time with the Packers. Eric Wilson has proven to be a reliable tackler, an effective blitzer, and a really good complementary player to Isaiah McDuffie. We've already gone through our Isaiah McDuffie prediction, and part of that discussion is his role, Isaiah McDuffie's, as being a run defender, right? Bringing a sound run defense presence to that linebacker position. Not that Eric Wilson can't fill that role either. We obviously saw him do that. But the complementary component for Eric Wilson is he's more of a coverage presence, right? So it gave the Green Bay Packers some options from a defensive perspective based on who they wanted on the field, given the opponent or the specific situations that they found themselves in. Then, in addition to what Eric Wilson brought on the defensive side of the ball, for the last two seasons, he has led the Green Bay Packers in special team snaps, and that note becomes even more impressive this past year, again, given that he played almost 600 defensive snaps on top of it. Eric Wilson, of the 6 special teams phases that there are, has been a primary contributor to 5 of those 6. And as Rich Bisaccia says, on the field on Sundays, on the practice field, in the meeting room, Eric Wilson is not someone who you will ever see lose focus. So those reasons in itself, everything just highlighted, I think that's enough to justify, all right, here's why the Packers should re-sign him, right? There's a valuable presence in having that experience off the bench on the defensive side of the ball if an injury strikes. There's obviously the special teams component that he brings, and of course that's an important part of this equation as well. But as I'm going through and I'm thinking through why would the Packers re-sign Eric Wilson, for me, the main reason, the primary reason, is if without Eric Wilson, let's ask ourselves in 2025, if Eric Wilson isn't on the team, who is the Packers' backup Mike linebacker? Let's say Quay Walker can't play for a week. Who's going to handle those Mike linebacker responsibilities if Eric Wilson isn't on the team? And remember, Isaiah McDuffie is a free agent this offseason as well. Last year, when Quay Walker did miss time, Eric Wilson did fill that Mike linebacker role for him and handled it very, very, very well. There is a lot, and Jeff Hafley talked about this during the season, but there is a lot that goes onto the plate of the Mike linebacker. For one, it's not just relaying the call, which Hafley said there's some play calls that they have that can get pretty lengthy, but it's making sure everyone gets set. It's making sure that everyone's aligned properly. It's calling out adjustments based on what the offense is doing. It's taking note and communicating to everyone any sort of movement that's taking place on the offensive side of the ball that then impacts the adjustments, any adjustments that the defensive side of the ball might have to make. And all that's happening, again, in those 15, 20, 25 seconds, whatever it might be, before the ball is snapped. Then the ball snapped, you have your responsibility, you make your play, you get up, that whole process starts all over again. There's a lot on the plate of the Mike linebacker. And Hafley said when Eric Wilson was asked to fill in, when he had to take on that responsibility during the time that Quay Walker was out, Hafley said that there's a calmness that comes when you have Eric Wilson in the middle of your defense. His experience, his preparation obviously plays an important factor in his readiness to step into that role. And there's a calmness when you have Eric Wilson. You know that he's on the bench, and you know that you can rely on him to handle what is a heavy workload that comes with that specific position. So without Eric Wilson, I just don't know who that backup Mike linebacker would be behind Quay Walker. Again, Isaiah McDuffie's a free agent. Edgerrin Cooper, he's been so good as the weak side, the will linebacker, that I don't know why you would move him, right? I remember saying this early on in Elton Jenkins' career, where it felt like there were those back-to-back off seasons where we're having conversations about, should he play guard? Should he play center? Should we move him to tackle? Instead of taking a step back and looking at the obvious answer and going, hey, Elton Jenkins is a really good guard. How about we let him be a really good guard? I think it's the same thing with Edgerrin Cooper. Could the Packers ask him to fill that role? Sure. But he's shown he has the potential to be a really good weak side linebacker. How about we just let him be a really good weak side linebacker? And then there's Tyron Hopper. I think potentially long term, the Packers would want him to work up into that Mike linebacker role, whether it's a backup, whether it's a starter, however things end up playing out. But going from being a special teams contributor as a rookie, seeing hardly any defensive snaps, to all of a sudden saying, you're the backup quarterback for our defense within just 1 year, that feels like a big jump. So I think, again, having Eric Wilson on your roster as insurance, so to speak, in case you do need someone to step into that role at any point during the season, I think there's a ton of value in that, because like I said, and for the reasons mentioned, if he's not on the roster, I don't know who's going to step into that role. All right, so why wouldn't the Green Bay Packers bring back Eric Wilson? Obviously, there's the football component to all of this, and then there's the contract, the salary cap component to all of this as well. And this is not a position, given who else the Packers have on the roster and the role and where Eric Wilson would be on the depth chart as the fourth linebacker likely, that we're going to see Brian Gutekunst overpay, right? He's already invested pretty heavily into this position, draft capital. Second round pick last year on Edgerrin Cooper, third round pick last year on Tyron Hopper, a couple years ago a first round pick on Quay Walker. We're coming up into the final year of Quay Walker's rookie deal. A decision's going to have to be made about his fifth year option, and as I discussed several videos ago now, following Brian Gutekunst's end of season press conference, if I had to guess, Quay Walker is going to be on this team beyond just the 2025 season. So this is a position group, more so salary cap wise going forward, but certainly draft capital wise, that the Packers have invested pretty heavily into. So when it comes to the fourth linebacker spot on the depth chart, that's not going to be a position or a player, not just whether it's Eric Wilson, but in general, whoever it might end up being. That's not a position that Gutekunst is going to overpay for. And when it comes to if the Packers do have interest in re-signing Eric Wilson, it only takes one other team, right, to have real interest and to see the role that Eric Wilson filled as the Mike linebacker, to see all of his special teams contributions in terms of across the 5 phases, the quantity of snaps, just the overall experience that he has in the NFL. It only takes one team to see what he put on tape last year and become interested. And all of a sudden, maybe it's a little more money. But I think also an important part of this as well is maybe it's a multi-year deal. Because like I said at the start, Eric Wilson's just played on 1-year deals in Green Bay. And if he returns in 2025, I don't know that that's going to be any different. So maybe it's more money. Maybe it's an extra $1 million or $2 million per year. Maybe it's a 2 or 3 year deal, which obviously brings some stability, and that's incredibly valuable as well. We can also look at the fact that Eric Wilson's going to be 31 years old during the season. Again, we typically see from a roster construction standpoint, especially with the Packers, when you have some stability at the top of the depth chart, and the Green Bay does, Quay Walker, Edgerrin Cooper, third round pick on Tyron Hopper, typically those more back-end roster spots, you're going to reserve those for more high upside, younger, more potential players that you see some traits, you want to develop them, and you're going to take a swing on it, right? Versus having a veteran on a 1-year deal occupying a roster spot. Typically, and again, this can be league-wide as well, but typically not a common, I should say. Obviously happens, but not as common of a roster construction approach, right? Typically in those fourth, fifth spots on the depth chart, whatever position you're talking about, you see younger, higher upside, higher potential players that teams are trying to develop. So I think that's an element in this as well. Coverage-wise, we mentioned that we saw Eric Wilson when he was utilized, not in the Mike linebacker role, but general playing time the last few seasons. He would be on the field in some of those more obvious passing situations. This past year, he gave up an 83% completion rate at the linebacker position. And just given the nature of that position, the completion rates there are they're often going to be higher. But again, anytime you're getting above that 80% mark, that quarterbacks would be pretty efficient against you. Gave up 10 yards per catch. Quarterback's opposing passer rating was 106.8, so above league average. And out of the 279 coverage snaps, according to Pro Football Focus, that Eric Wilson had last season, he only made 2 plays on the football during those coverage snaps. So again, is there the opportunity for Green Bay to go find higher upside, higher potential, again, to round out the back end of that depth chart? And this, again, like I said, this isn't going to be a position where the Packers overpay. So this could be one of those situations where they have their line in the sand. They're not going to go above it in terms of dollars, not going to go above it in terms of years. And again, if another team has interest in Wilson, they might just go the other direction and try to make another Wilson-like addition, right? Someone who's maybe going into their second contract, maybe their third contract in the NFL, has special teams experience, has some defensive experience as well. Not to say that that you're going to find the same impact going this route, but there's a number of players each off season who fit that mold, right? Second contract, third contract, been core special teams contributors, have played some defensive snaps during their career, right? Those players are out there, so the Packers could just opt to go, again, because it's linebacker 4, they could opt to go in that direction and, again, try to make another Eric Wilson-like addition in free agency. Again, the big thing here is they're not going to overpay for their fourth linebacker. All right, prediction time. I think Eric Wilson is going to be back with the Green Bay Packers. And the big reason, like I said, to be the backup Mike linebacker. And I think long term, even if Quay Walker does return beyond the 2025 season, I think Tyron Hopper can potentially grow into that role. I think he can be the strong side linebacker when they're lined up in their base defense. We have Walker in the middle, Hopper as the strong side linebacker, Cooper as the weak side linebacker. I think that's how those three can work together long term. I think Hopper has the ability to transition into being the Mike linebacker, whether it's in a backup role or whatever capacity that might end up being. But I don't know that that's going to be the case in 2025. Again, going from playing really no defensive snaps to potentially being the behind Quay Walker, but potentially being the backup quarterback of the defense feels like a really big jump to make. And like I said with Cooper, he's exceptional in the role that he's in. Let him continue to be high impact and exceptional in that role. So I think Eric Wilson's ability to be the backup Mike linebacker, give the Packers some insurance at that important position. To me, that's reason number one why you resign him. Then again, you have the special teams contributions that he brings, led the team in that category in snaps over the last 2 seasons, plays consistently in 5 of the 6 phases. His contract's not going to break the bank either. Over the cap, Wilson's contract this past year was $1.2 million. I mean, even if he gets a pay raise this year, salary cap wise, you are not breaking the bank. But for the first 2 reasons mentioned, ton of value that he can bring to your team. And if you watch my Isaiah McDuffie prediction, one of the reasons that I do not think that McDuffie will be back is that re-signing him can impede the growth of Tyron Hopper. I don't think that's the case with Eric Wilson. And where McDuffie's at in his career versus where Wilson's at in his career, 2 different points, 2 different trajectories right now, right? With McDuffie going into his second contract, he's looking to sign this offseason. That's going to be a multi-year deal. There's going to be several $1 million worth of cap charges that you're investing into that player to then make him your 4th linebacker because you want to develop Tyron Hopper. When we just said Gutekunst isn't going to overpay for the 4th linebacker, that just doesn't jive. The timelines there do not align whatsoever. But with Eric Wilson, a veteran, on a 1-year deal, likely. And we saw it last season as well. Once Edgerrin Cooper was healthy, Quay Walker was healthy at the end of the year, Isaiah McDuffie was the third linebacker. Eric Wilson was already in that fourth linebacker role. So I don't think having him on the roster is going to impede Tyron Hopper's growth and him taking on a larger role in his second NFL season. I think Eric Wilson's value to the Green Bay Packers and what they need him to do, the roles he fills on this Packers team, I think that's greater than any other team, or most other teams, I should say. And I think the contract that he receives, the attention, I think that's going to be reflected in that compared to going out on the open market. And one would assume anyways that Wilson, knowing his role on this team, the continuity that's there, playing with Bisaccia, playing under Halfley again, I think there's value for him as well in terms of coming back to the Packers. So there you have it, my friends. I appreciate you guys tuning in as always. And if you've got to this point in the video, you might as well hit like, you might as well hit subscribe on the channel. Once again, I do greatly appreciate it. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. Find out my work over at ESPNLacrosse.com. Download the 105.5 ESPN Lacrosse app. And until next time, friends, take care.